All right, hello biology people. Here to continue onwards with our semester. Up to this point, we've arrived at that important concept of the cell, that eukaryotic cell, that fundamental unit of life, all of the life qualities, all of the organelles. And at this point, we can go into like maybe 4 or 5 different trajectories. So what I'm going to do now, before we go into mitosis, before we go into meiosis, genetics, which are all trajectories of that eukaryotic cell, we're going to go inwards and we're going to focus on the energy production of the cell. So we know that carbs, lipids, and proteins go into that mitochondria. We know that the cell or the mitochondria transforms, converts that energy into ATP. So that's the simple, what is cellular respiration? It's the conversion of carbs, lipids, and proteins into ATP. That's the easy, the what. The more technical, the more challenging part, the how. Well, how does that transition happen? How do we go from carbs to ATP? Right? And it's a little bit more of a discussion, a little bit more of a sort of a chemical process. And we're going to get into that in several lectures to get through chapter 9. And so chapter 9 is a challenging chapter. I don't know if you're fans of rock climbing, American Ninja Warrior, that kind of stuff. So you know that this is a very physically demanding type of sport. Right? You have to be in very, very great physical condition, lots of finger strength, forearm strength, that kind of stuff. And I would say this is a very, very difficult climb here. Yeah. So when you talk to these rock climbers, there's a certain vocabulary that they use, right? They talk about the crux, C-R-U-X, the crux of the course. And the crux basically, in rock climbing and also in just other sort of context, the crux is the device, or I should say the decisive or most important point at issue, a particular point of difficulty. So I would say this is pretty tough. If you can make it beyond that crux, that most difficult part, then it gets better, it gets easier. So if you can make it beyond the crux to that side, it's probably easier to climb on over. So when we get to chapter 9, for a lot of students, chapter 9 is that crux of the course. There's a lot of students struggle with this chapter, not because it's that difficult per se, it's just, it's gonna kind of highlight any weaknesses that you have up to this point. So what chapter 9 deals with basically is metabolism, right? So it's metabolism, metabolic pathways. So these issues give some students a hard time. And hopefully you're not one of those students that struggles with this section, but it really forces you to bring all of your knowledge, right? All the prior knowledge gets all integrated here. Chemistry comes back and haunts some of you, but we'll try to make it as straightforward, as easy as possible here, right? So metabolism is a total of all the reactions in the body. And if you can imagine the body, right, we have trillions of cells, right? Trillions of cells, and in each cell is repairing and kind of operating their own sort of biology. So it's a lot. It's kind of almost a theoretical kind of number, right? But we break down metabolism into 2 easier parts to kind of visualize. We talk about anabolism and we talk about catabolism. So anabolic reactions and catabolic reactions. We've touched upon these before. So anabolic process is the building reaction, dehydration synthesis, right? Catabolism is the destructive reactions or hydrolysis reactions. So when we talk about photosynthesis, we touched upon photosynthesis very, very briefly in the chapter 7 discussion, but we said that sunlight is converted. It's sort of built into glucose, into carbohydrates. That's what we call photosynthesis. Cellular respiration is going to start then with glucose and break glucose apart down to release ATP. It's a conversion process again, yeah? But this is where these terms are going to come into play. So photosynthesis was overall I mean, there's a lot of little reactions, but overall, we say that was an anabolic process. And cellular respiration, there's a lot of processes, but overall, the net result is going to be a catabolic process, a destructive process. We're breaking apart glucose. And this is going to happen in metabolic pathways. And metabolic pathways defined as a series of enzyme catalyzed reactions. So we come back to enzymes, right? Chapter 3, or I should say chapter 8, proteins chapter 3, enzymes chapter 8. So again, everything that you've learned now kind of gets built together here in chapter 9. I'll upload a little video of a pathway onto Blackboard here. But when these chemists talk about pathways, it kind of is a good term, I think, right? You know, going back up north to Oregon, when you talk about paths, right, this would be a path. Maybe different looking than the path here in El Paso, but when you talk about a path, you don't sit there and have a picnic in the path. The path is kind of implying it's a road, but there's going to be movement on this path, right? There's going to be a lot of chemical reactions that happen. It's not something stationary. It's movement. It's kinetic. There's a lot of things happening, and that's this sort of chemical, metaphorical word that they talk about, pathways. Yeah. So chemical pathways. So metabolic pathways, chemical pathways, are again a series of enzyme catalyzed reactions. And in order to really fully understand them, you're going to have to remember some discussion of chemistry. You're going to have to integrate old chemistry discussion, oxidation, reduction, chemical reactions, going from reactants to products, our 4 macromolecules, proteins, carbs, lipids, nucleic acids, enzymes, right? Those proteins, the enzymes from chapter 8, energy, our substrate, our active sites. So each one of these chapters, each one of these topics within the chapters are basically like puzzle pieces. And once you learn that puzzle piece, the goal is that you then can connect it with the other puzzle pieces. Chapter 2 connected to chapter 3, chapter 2 and 3 connected to chapter 7, right? So how do all of these things fit together? That is the crux of Biology 1306. If you can make those connections, hey, you're going to be in a very, very good position to do well on this section and then do well in the next courses, your anatomy courses, because you're going to need all of these puzzle pieces then to connect together for your anatomy discussion over there. So again, an important skill that you have to acquire, right? A lot of you, you learn a topic in the chapter and you leave it there and you mentally separate it out into another section, right? But these things blend together, right? They're all blended together. They all have an impact on each other. So metabolic pathways, again, series of enzyme catalyzed reactions in which the product of one reaction serves as the reactant for the next reaction. So let's see if we can visualize that, right? So here we have reaction 1. So there's our substrate. Remember substrate fitting into the active site of enzyme 1, enzyme catalyzed reaction. So after that substrate is worked upon by the enzyme, we generate a product. But this product then is going to serve as the substrate for the next reaction, which generates a product. And that product then serves as the substrate for the next reaction. So enzyme 3 cannot work on substrate 1. Enzyme 3 cannot work on substrate 2. It can only function when all of these steps happen and we get to that proper product, which serves as the reactant for this particular enzyme. So again, these become tedious. These pathways, they're not necessarily difficult, but they are, it's a lot. And we can't skip or hop over or shortcut. We have to go reaction by reaction by reaction by reaction. Right? So they're somewhat linear in that progression here. Right? So, and then we come back to the idea of inhibition. Right? So then this can actually act as an allosteric or non-competitive inhibitor. And again, bringing back a lot of the material that you've covered, that we've already seen in prior chapters, right? But again, did you forget it, or is it stuck in there long term? Hopefully it's there long term. So just to give you an overview, I'm gonna pause this video here, then I'm gonna start with the next one here. But this is sort of the big picture. This is where we're going, right? So photosynthesis was a metabolic pathway that we didn't really touch upon, but we know that we convert sunlight into stored chemical energy. That stored chemical energy we're gonna call glucose, right? It's that monosaccharide. Once we have that, then we can take it down into two separate pathways, either cellular respiration or fermentation. Again, I'm going to touch on a lot of details with those, but for now, let me stop this here and I'll continue onwards in a bit.